everyone, ready to dive deep.
Always.
Today we're tackling something we all deal with, communication, especially in relationships.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is, but luckily we've got an awesome guide. We're cracking open Say This, Not That by Dr. Carl Alasko.
I've heard great things about that book.
Me too, and with over 20 years as a psychologist, Dr. Alasko knows his stuff. So if you're looking to boost your communication game, you're in the right place.
From what I've read, Alasko starts strong. He doesn't beat around the bush. He dives right into how powerful our words are. The idea that they can actually hurt or heal relationships.
That's so true. We've all felt the sting of words said in the heat of the moment, right?
Absolutely. And in that first chapter, Alasko uses a really common example to highlight this point. Like, imagine a big argument where someone just blurts out, "You never listen."
Oh, I've definitely been there, both saying it and hearing it. Not exactly a recipe for a happy relationship.
No, not at all. Alasko points out that kind of language puts people on the defensive immediately. It slams the door shut on any productive conversation.
It's like you're building a wall instead of a bridge.
Exactly. So instead of resorting to blame, he introduces this idea of healing language, shifting the focus to our own feelings.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work in practice?
So instead of that "you never listen," which is accusatory, you could say, "I feel unheard when we talk about this topic." It's subtle, but really powerful.
So you're owning your experience instead of pointing the finger. I can see how that would change the tone of the conversation. What I'm wondering is, what makes this shift so impactful psychologically? Why are I statements better than you statements?
Well, when we use I statements, it takes the sting out. The other person doesn't feel attacked. They're more likely to actually listen and try to understand our perspective. It opens the door to empathy and real dialogue.
So it's not about sugarcoating things. It's about framing them in a way that leads to connection, not conflict.
Exactly. And it's not just a quick fix. It can have long-term benefits for building healthier relationships.
I love that. It's like giving your relationship a communication upgrade. And speaking of upgrades, in Chapter 2, Alaska gets super practical. He gives us specific toxic language patterns to ditch and, even better, what to say instead.
He really breaks it down, doesn't he? He talks about blaming, criticizing, shaming, all those communication habits that can really poison a relationship.
Like those "you always" or "you never" statements. They're like conversational grenades.
They are. And, Alasko talks about the power of open-ended questions, too. So instead of "why are you always late?" which sounds like an accusation, you might ask, "What happened that made you late today?"
That's so much better. It shows you're genuinely curious and not just trying to pick a fight. It seems like all these techniques are about creating a space for genuine connection, even when things are tough.
You're spot on. And to really illustrate this, Alasko uses a scenario we can probably all relate to: a couple arguing about chores.
Oh, the age-old battle of who does what around the house. Been there, done that. So how does Alasko tackle this communication train wreck?
He shows how using I statements and open-ended questions completely transforms the conversation. Instead of "you never do the dishes," it becomes, "I feel overwhelmed when the sink is full of dishes. Would you be willing to help me out tonight?"
Wow, what a difference. Instead of feeling attacked, the other person is invited to be part of the solution.
Right. And that's where real progress can happen. And then Alasko shifts gears a bit in Chapter 3, focusing on essential communication skills that we need for any interaction, not just arguments.
Okay, so what are some of these foundational skills?
Active listening is a big one. It's more than just hearing words. It's about really being present, engaging with the other person, and making them feel heard.
I've heard of that, but how do you actually do it?
Alasko emphasizes that it's an active process, not passive. It involves asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard, and responding with empathy. It's not just about downloading information. It's about making the other person feel truly understood.
I can see how that ties back to the I statements too, right? Both techniques are about creating that space for open and honest expression.
Absolutely. I statements are like a secret weapon for active listening because they show you're acknowledging the other person's feelings without judgment. It builds mutual respect and makes it easier to connect on a deeper level.
This is great. We're getting a whole communication toolkit here. And I'm curious, how does Alasko handle those really tough conversations, the ones we often avoid?
That's Chapter 4. And what's fascinating is that he emphasizes empathy, even in those situations.
Right.
He argues that putting yourself in the other person's shoes, even if you disagree, is key to de-escalating tension and finding common ground.
That makes sense, but doesn't empathy mean you have to agree with the other person?
Not at all. It's about understanding their perspective and acknowledging their feelings, even if you see things differently.
So it's about validation, not necessarily agreement. I like that. I remember Alasko gives a great example of a phrase that embodies this. I understand that you're feeling upset because it's so simple, but it acknowledges the other person's experience without judgment.
Exactly. And that validation can be so disarming, especially in a heated moment. It helps shift the conversation from a battle to a collaboration, which is essential for finding solutions.
It's like you're both on the same team, working together to solve a problem.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can make all the difference. Now, I'm curious, how do you think these principles apply when we're not just talking about everyday conversations, but trying to use our words to influence or inspire?
That's a great question. And luckily, Alasko dives into that in Chapter 5. He goes beyond everyday communication and explores how to speak with purpose, whether it's to motivate a team or deliver a speech that moves people to action.
It's about taking our communication skills to the next level.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that Alasko argues that whether you're giving a presentation to a boardroom or trying to convince your friend to try a new restaurant, the same principles apply.
So, what are those universal principles? What's the secret sauce of speaking with purpose?
He breaks it down into three core elements: clarity, authenticity, and, you guessed it, empathy.
Okay, those make sense, but how do they play out in real-world communication?
Well, to illustrate this, Alasko uses a brilliant example: Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. We're not going to summarize the speech itself, but Alasko breaks down how King masterfully used those three elements to create such a powerful and memorable message.
I'm hooked. Break it down for us. What makes that speech so effective through the lens of clarity, authenticity, and empathy?
Let's start with clarity. King's language is so simple and direct. It cuts through all the noise and gets straight to the heart of his message. He avoids jargon and complex language, making it easy for everyone to understand his vision of a world where people are judged by their character, not their skin color.
It's so powerful in its simplicity. It's not about showing off his vocabulary. It's about connecting with people on a heart-to-heart level. What about authenticity? How does that come through in the speech?
King speaks from a place of deep personal experience and conviction. He doesn't shy away from the pain and injustice faced by Black Americans, but he also expresses his unwavering hope for a better future. That authenticity shines through in every word he speaks, making his message all the more compelling.
It's that combination of vulnerability and strength that makes him so relatable, even decades later.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, how does empathy play into this iconic speech?
Even though King is talking about the specific struggles of Black Americans, he does so in a way that invites empathy from people of all backgrounds. He paints a picture of a future where everyone can live together in harmony and equality, appealing to our shared humanity and our longing for a more just and compassionate world.
It's not about us versus them. It's about creating a better world for everyone. That's a message that transcends any dividing line. What I love about this analysis is that it shows how these same principles can be used by anyone, whether you're giving a speech or just trying to have a meaningful conversation.
Exactly. We can all learn from King's mastery of language. It's empowering to realize that we all have the potential to communicate more effectively, regardless of our background or experience.
That's so true. It's like he's saying that anyone can become a more skillful communicator. We just need to understand and apply these core principles. So how does Alasko bring this down to earth and apply these principles to our personal relationships?
That's chapter 6. And he argues that while these communication skills are valuable everywhere, they're absolutely essential for building strong, healthy relationships with the people we care about most.
It's easy to think that communication should be effortless in those close relationships, but honestly, that's rarely the case. Even the most loving couples and families can struggle to communicate effectively.
Absolutely. And what Alasko emphasizes here is the importance of active listening, not just hearing the words, but really tuning in to the unspoken emotions and needs driving those words.
It's like we need to become emotional detectives looking for clues beyond the surface level.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he shares a case study about a couple, Jane and Mark, who are struggling to communicate about, you guessed it, household chores, a classic relationship battleground.
Oh, I know that struggle all too well.
Yeah.
So how does Alasko unpack their communication breakdown? What are they doing wrong?
Initially, they fall into a trap. We've talked about blaming and criticizing. Jane feels overwhelmed, so she says things like, "You never help around the house," which of course makes Mark defensive.
It's that negative spiral, that blame game that just escalates the conflict. So how do they break free from that pattern?
Alasko guides them to use the same principles we've been discussing: I statements, open-ended questions, and empathy. Instead of blaming Mark, Jane learns to express her needs constructively, saying something like, "I feel overwhelmed with the chores and would really appreciate more help."
That's such a small shift, but I bet it makes a huge difference. It's not about attacking Mark, it's about inviting him to be a partner in finding a solution.
Exactly. And that's when real change can happen. They start working together instead of against each other. And what Alasko emphasizes is that even small communication tweaks like this can have a ripple effect, leading to more understanding, connection, and intimacy.
It's a powerful reminder that we don't need a complete communication overhaul. Sometimes just a few adjustments can make a big difference. So, speaking of making changes, how does Alaska suggest we make this a lifelong practice? It's not a one and done kind of deal, right?
You're so right. He dedicates a whole chapter to this, chapter 7, where he emphasizes that becoming a better communicator is a journey, not a destination. We're constantly growing and evolving, and our communication skills need to evolve too.
So, what are some key takeaways for making this a lifelong practice? What does Alaska suggest we focus on?
He highlights the importance of feedback, self-reflection, and even seeking out opportunities to learn and practice our skills in different settings. He also talks about how important it is to be adaptable, especially with how much communication is changing with technology.
It's like we need to become lifelong students of communication, always learning and refining our approach.
Exactly. And that adaptability is key because the way we communicate is constantly evolving. Think about it, we're texting, emailing, video chatting, and engaging on social media more than ever before.
It's a whole new communication landscape, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But what you said earlier is so reassuring. Even though the platforms are changing, those core principles of effective communication, clarity, authenticity, and empathy remain the same.
They do. It's just a matter of adapting them to the specific context. And this is where feedback becomes so valuable. Alasko encourages us to seek feedback from others, not just in formal settings like performance reviews, but in everyday conversations.
It's about being open to hearing how our words land on others, even if it's not always easy to hear.
Absolutely. And he also stresses the importance of self-reflection, taking time to pause and ask ourselves, how am I showing up in my communication? Are we being clear, authentic, empathetic? These are powerful questions that can guide our growth.
It's like becoming our own communication coach, observing ourselves and making intentional choices to communicate more effectively.
I love that. And through that self-reflection, we not only improve our communication, we also deepen our understanding of ourselves. We become more self-aware, more compassionate, and more skillful at navigating the complexities of human connection.
You know, one thing that really resonates with me about Alasko's approach is that it goes beyond techniques. He's offering a whole new way of thinking about communication, one that prioritizes empathy, understanding, and the power of words to build bridges, not walls.
I couldn't agree more. And that shift in perspective can have a ripple effect, not only in our personal relationships, but also in our workplaces, our communities, and the world at large.
It's like he's saying that effective communication isn't just a nice to have skill, it's a fundamental human need, essential for our well being and for creating a more harmonious and connected world.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing is, it's a skill we can all develop and continue to refine throughout our lives. It takes effort and a willingness to learn and grow, but the rewards are immeasurable.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one tangible step our listeners can take today to start putting these principles into practice? What's one small action that can make a big difference?
One simple but powerful practice Alasko recommends is to pay attention to the words we use. Become aware of those phrases that tend to trigger defensiveness or shut down communication, and experiment with replacing them with more constructive alternatives.
It's like decluttering our language, getting rid of those toxic phrases and choosing words that build bridges instead of burning them.
Exactly. And as you start making those small changes, you'll likely notice a ripple effect in your relationships. Conversations will flow more smoothly, conflicts will be easier to resolve, and you'll experience a deeper sense of connection with the people you care about most.
That's a pretty amazing outcome, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a testament to the power of words to shape our world, one conversation at a time.
We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring Alasko's insightful guidance on everything from the impact of everyday phrases to the art of speaking with purpose and the importance of empathy in building stronger relationships. We'll be back soon to wrap up our exploration of say this, not that, but for now, take a moment to reflect on the power of empathy in your own communication. How can you bring more understanding and compassion into your conversations today?
That's a great question to ponder. Until next time. Welcome back. We're diving deeper into the world of better communication, using Dr. Alasko's insights as our guide.
Right. And before our break, we were talking about how crucial empathy is, even in those tough conversations.
It's like Alasko gives us a map to navigate those tricky situations.
And, one thing that stood out to me in chapter 7 is how Alaska emphasizes that becoming a better communicator isn't a finish line, it's a journey, right?
Yeah, he makes that point really clear, doesn't he? The more we put these skills into practice, the more equipped we become to handle all sorts of situations, no matter how challenging.
It's almost like leveling up in a video game. You gain more experience, new skills, and you can face tougher challenges.
I like that analogy. And as we level up our communication skills, we gain confidence and become more resilient too.
That makes sense. But speaking of challenges, I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed with how communication has changed with technology. Texting, email, video calls, social media, it's a lot to keep up with.
Oh, absolutely. It can definitely feel like a whole new world, right? But what's interesting is, even though the way we communicate is constantly evolving, those core principles of effective communication stay the same.
So it's not about mastering every new app or platform. It's about applying those fundamentals, clarity, authenticity, empathy, in whatever way we're communicating.
Exactly. We just have to adapt them to the specific context. And that's where Alasko's emphasis on feedback is so important. We need to be open to hearing how our words are landing on others, even if it's not what we want to hear.
It's like getting feedback on a project at work. Sometimes a fresh perspective helps us catch things we might have missed on our own.
Exactly. That feedback can help us fine-tune our approach, spot those blind spots, and ultimately communicate more effectively.
He also talks about the importance of self-reflection, doesn't he? Really taking the time to examine how we're showing up in our conversations.
He does. Self-reflection is crucial. It's about stepping back and asking those key questions. How am I communicating? Am I being clear, authentic, and empathetic? It's like hitting pause on a movie and really analyzing a particular scene. What's working, what's not? How can we make it better?
I love that analogy. And through that self-reflection, not only do we improve our communication, but we also gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, right?
Absolutely. It's a journey of self-discovery as much as it is about improving our communication skills. We become more self-aware, more compassionate, and better equipped to navigate the intricacies of human connection.
What I really appreciate about Alaska's approach is that it's not just about techniques or strategies. He emphasizes that effective communication is ultimately about something much deeper, creating connection, fostering understanding, and acknowledging that shared humanity we all have.
He really nails that, doesn't he? It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, trying to navigate the ups and downs of human relationships. And communication is that key tool that helps us build bridges, resolve conflicts, and create a more compassionate world.
It's like he's saying that effective communication isn't just a skill set, it's a way of being in the world, a way of relating to others.
Precisely. And it's a way of being that can transform not only our personal relationships, but our interactions in the workplace, our communities, really everywhere we go.
So powerful. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one small but impactful action our listeners can take today to start putting these principles into practice?
You know, one simple but powerful practice Alaska suggests is to pay close attention to the words we use. Notice those phrases that tend to trigger defensiveness or shut down communication. See if you can replace them with more constructive alternatives.
It's like we're decluttering our language, getting rid of those toxic phrases that create barriers and replacing them with words that actually build bridges.
That's a great way to put it. And as you start making those small changes, you'll probably be amazed at the ripple effect it creates. Conversations become smoother, conflicts are easier to resolve, and you feel more connected to the people around you.
Those are definitely changes worth making. Alasko leaves his readers with a really thought-provoking question to consider. What if the words we use every day were seen as the building blocks of our relationships?
Ooh, that is a good one. It really gets you thinking about the power our words have, right? Every word we utter, every phrase we choose, it's like we're shaping those relationships, building them up or tearing them down.
That's such a powerful reminder to be mindful of the language we use, knowing that it can make or break those connections that matter so much.
It emphasizes that we have a responsibility to choose our words carefully. They have the power to impact not just ourselves, but also the people around us and ultimately the world we live in.
And that awareness is what allows us to tap into the truly transformative power of communication.
Exactly. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final nugget of wisdom from Dr. Alasko. He writes, "The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said."
Whoa, that's profound. He's encouraging us to become masters of reading between the lines, right?
He is. It's about recognizing that communication goes way beyond the words themselves. It's about tuning into body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, all those subtle cues that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface.
It's like we need to become emotional detectives, gathering clues to understand the whole story.
I love that. And that requires us to be present, to really listen deeply, and to try to see the world through the other person's eyes, even when it's different from our own perspective.
It's about understanding that sometimes the most impactful communication happens in those silent spaces, the pauses between words, where true understanding can emerge.
So well said. As you navigate the world of communication, remember to listen with your heart as much as your ears. Be present, be empathetic, and be mindful of how your words can create connection and foster understanding.
And remember, this journey of becoming a better communicator is ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to explore, and always new ways to connect with those around us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. It's been a joy to explore the transformative power of communication with you.
Welcome back to the deep dive, ready to wrap up our exploration of how to say the right things.
I feel like we've gotten some great takeaways from Dr. Alasko.
He definitely gave us a lot to think about. From those I statements, which seem so simple but are so powerful, to really mastering the art of listening actively and approaching even the tough conversations with empathy. It's a lot.
It is. He really packed a lot of wisdom into say this, not that. It's hitting me now that it's not just about learning a bunch of techniques. It's really more about shifting our whole mindset about communication, isn't it?
That's so true. I hadn't thought about it like that before. But it's like Alaska is saying, every conversation, no matter how small, is a chance to practice these principles.
Yeah, it's not just about those big important talks. It's about bringing that awareness and intention to everything we say, every interaction we have.
I like that. Whether it's talking to a coworker or catching up with a friend or even just ordering a coffee, it's about making the choice to use language that creates connection and respect.
It really is. It's like we're creating something beautiful, a tapestry of communication, and every single thread we choose contributes to the whole picture.
I love that analogy, and it shows that all those tiny choices, all those little moments, actually add up to something much bigger.
They do. It's like a ripple effect. As we become more mindful of the language we use, we're not only changing our own lives, we're impacting the world around us.
So powerful. And Alaska doesn't shy away from the fact that communication is hard. It's not always smooth sailing.
Right? There are going to be times when we mess up. We'll have misunderstandings and disagreements. We'll feel frustrated or like we're not being heard.
It's part of being human, but what I like is that he doesn't pretend it's always going to be easy. He's realistic, but he also offers so much hope.
He does. He constantly reminds us that even small changes, small improvements can have a huge impact. It's not about reaching some level of perfection. It's about learning and growing over time.
It's a journey we're all on together. So as we bring our deep dive into Say This, Not That to a close, I want to thank you for being a part of this conversation.
It has been such a pleasure exploring this with you. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, keep practicing these skills, and never underestimate the power of words.
Remember those nuggets of wisdom Dr. Alasko shared with us? And never forget that each word you choose has the power to make a difference.
That's right. The power to build bridges, to mend broken connections, to create a world that's more understanding and compassionate. Until next time, happy communicating.